So when we think about our footprint of the world that we're in today, we need to understand that we as humans are not just a negative impact on the earth. In fact, I argue the opposite. If you look at human evolution, the portion of our existence where we've had, dramatic changes to ecosystems, dramatic changes to social well-being, and causing economic disparity and all of these things. This is a very small window of the entire evolution of the human species. And so when we say that your environmental impact is, or your ecological footprint is to reduce the bad things we do to the earth, we are completely misframing the idea of what it means to be human today. And so when we look at what it means to be human, well, it doesn't just mean how many times did you take a flight this year, how many steaks did you eat, and how much electricity and heating do you use, which is how we usually measure an ecological footprint. It also needs to account for how many trees have you planted, how much carbon have you built into your heavy mulched organic matter gardening systems, how many times have you helped a grandmother with her Google account or with shopping, how many times have you helped consult or discuss with friends who are facing depression and who are having thoughts of suicide. These are social building factors and environmental building factors that are not counted for when we look at our environmental impact as human beings. We often look at our economic impacts and then our direct negative impacts. So we need to break away from this idea that humans are a negative species and that is the only iteration of who we are and how we can be on this earth today. So what is the green that you are impacting? Are you positive? Are you producing green space? Are you producing social habitat? Are you producing environmental habitat for our ecosystems and our community to grow? Or are you just consuming and fitting into this one negative perspective that we have established for humans as consumers? If we want examples of how humans have been positive around the world, there are countless, but this one from the Amazon I find to be very, very impactful because we often talk about the Amazon rainforest as the lungs of the planet, as this massive natural ecosystem that has this ecosystem benefit that we need to value, that is propping up our oxygen supply on the planet Earth. When in reality, this isn't just a natural ecosystem. There have been studies that have shown, first of all, in the tropics, there's only usually a very thin layer of topsoil. And there are areas that they've found 6 feet of topsoil that is mixed with a biochar-like substance. So it's not actually biochar separately. It's called TERRA, PRETA, which is a compost biochar system. And this was done by the Amazonian tribes that were in this area over the hundreds of years in order to build up the soil profile and change the actual nutrient and water retention and carbon retention of that soil. So we have carbon sequestration, but we also have nutrient retention, which means a healthier, more lush condition to grow trees. Now, the other thing that's really interesting that this article points out is that the areas that have been affected by the local peoples have actually a 20 times the edible species present than in a normal tropical forest ecosystem. Yes, there's mangoes and bananas and nuts and things like that in these ecosystems, in these natural ecosystems. But in the areas that were designed and maintained by these local peoples, there is a much greater percentage of these edible trees. And so it is through the cultivation of soil and the planting and maintaining of edible forest gardens or edible food forests that the Amazon was actually created and maintained to some large part. And this is not an insignificant amount. This is a large component of this ecosystem. So when you think that humans only have negative impacts and that we are only creating despair, we need to stop watching the news and Netflix and scrolling through Facebook and start really looking into the alternative histories that is our human species, because we've got way more abundance in our background than many of us even believe. So the other place we're going to get started today is looking at some of the most important key, focuses that we can look at in how to tackle our way of life in order to improve our carbon footprint and improve our positive ecological gain to this ecosystem that we live in. The project that I'm talking about here is called Project DRAWDOWN. Project DRAWDOWN is the single comprehensive list of solutions that has been drawn up It's the most comprehensive list. There's over 80 of them, and these are just the top 10. And they show how easy it, or specifically what the solution is, what sector it's going to approach, the total atmospheric carbon that can be reduced if we are to tackle this sector, the net costs, and then the savings that it will have for us, right? So whether it's a net cost or a net gain. And so if you look at the first one here, refrigerant management, this document is talking about how our fridges and our air conditioners, when they're disposed of, those cooling liquids have a massive impact on our greenhouse gas emission. Now, in permaculture, we don't ask, how do we better take care of the waste that is from the refrigeration and air conditioning? We bring the question back a notch and question the inevitability of that waste stream. So do we actually need refrigeration and air conditioning? Yes, in some cases, but no in others. And so when we look at permaculture to design solutions, we really want to step it back a notch and question the inevitability of that waste stream. So when we look at the refrigeration, as in the air conditioning of our buildings, which is a massive, massive impact on greenhouse gas emissions and electricity consumption. So if we think just electricity consumption, which is one of those huge carbon emitters, we can have a secondary impact there as well. But if we just question the inevitability of our need for air conditioning, which is kind of difficult in a world that's getting hotter and hotter, our cities are getting hotter and hotter, and we are in need of more and more housing that has refrigeration to prevent all kinds of different illnesses and heat stroke and so on and so forth. But what we don't look at is how to design buildings better in order to avoid the ultimate need for air conditioning. Now, if we look at one of the best examples that I've seen in the world, this is a hotel, and this image in the middle here is a hotel in Singapore. This is the Oasis Hotel, and the hotel has no air conditioning whatsoever. Now, in the middle of summer, in the middle of Singapore or some big city, you would never book a hotel that didn't have air conditioning. It's just unheard of. You would cook inside your apartment. This building does not require air conditioning, which is why it's not present, because it has a trellis wrapped around the building that is vegetated with perennial growth. And therefore, during the summer, those plants block out that heat and reduce the need for air conditioning by 50 to 70%. And you can do this to any building. You obviously don't need to put grapevines or hardy vines that are woody and will get into the structure of your building, but you can put things like hops, which is an annual vine but a perennial root, meaning it'll grow back every year, and you can dramatically reduce up to 70% reduction of the air conditioning on any existing building in the city that we have today, in the suburbs that we have today, or even in the country. So you at home could plant a row of hops and dramatically have a positive impact on your emissions of greenhouse gases and your electricity use simply by eliminating this need for air conditioning. Now we can get into refrigeration and look at all the other forms of refrigeration. When I was working in China, the massive food storage system was actually all these caves that were dug into the side of hills that were using the natural cooling of the earth to be the major refrigeration system for crops that were coming from small farms. So there's a lot of different ways we can look at this. But this is just to give you an idea that some of the solutions out there to the biggest problems that we face to have the most beneficial impact are incredibly simple.